Hello, folks. Today it looks like we are on episode Unlucky 13, or perhaps Lucky 13, I don't know. But today we are going to look at is, or in Perthshire it would generally just be s. This word is like the English am, is, are, etc. Except it isn't necessarily used in that way most of the time these days. It's kind of, by itself, it is used in a more poetic sense or with a lot of emphasis. But generally, you wouldn't say that this is this in the same way. We will get into it in later lessons, but for now, let's just have a look at is on its own. So is, am, are, is, etc. Usually when you want to equate one thing with another thing, so for example, a noun and a pronoun, it would be is, and then noun, and then pronoun. So for example, it is Gaelic would be something like is Gaelica, is Gaelica. In East Perthshire Gaelic, and much of Perthshire Gaelic it seems, the masculine pronoun, or a, has replaced instances where the feminine would usually have been used. So often it would just be a. But I believe, if memory serves correctly, in standard it would be isgaliki, isgaliki. The word for tall is ard, ard. And to say something like it is tall or he is tall, you would say sada, sada. So if you were to kind of slow it down and break it up, you might have is ad a, sada. The main word for small is krien, krien. She is small, skrieni, skrieni. The word for horse is ech, and the horse is anjech, anjech. So the horse is big is more anjech, is more anjech. The word for bad is don, don. So the fox is bad is don am balagar, is don am balagar. You would either use these sentences in something like poetry or writing, or alternatively you would use them when you're trying to emphasize something. So often this use of is, or its other forms, is a way of emphasizing some sort of information. So bringing it to the front of the sentence and, to the front of people's minds. In English, we would add a not to make the negative. But in Gaelic, the negative form of is chan, or hun. Chan. It isn't Gaelic. Chan Gaelica. Chan Gaelica. She isn't a cat. Chan cat-i. Chan cat-i. She isn't a small dog. Chan cú beg-i. Chan cú beg-i. Perhaps you shouldn't use that sentence with people. But you would refer to animals. So, for example, female dogs, etc. With the feminine pronoun, so I rather than a. So things that are clearly feminine would use I. But other things where you're not quite sure, it seems to have been changed to a. A good example of this is the weather. Often I see people in East Perthshire Gaelic talking about the weather as a rather than an E, but in standard it would definitely be E. It is not a fine or not a beautiful place. Chan arch lach a. Chan arch lach a. The word for a very young child is lenu. Lenu. And the word for pretty is bria. Bria. So, the very young child isn't pretty. Would be something like Chan bria lenu. Chan bria lenu. The question form of is n. So in standard it would probably be more clearly spoken as an. But in Perthshire it would be just n. And to ask something like, is he big or is it big, would be something like mora. Mora. The word for animal is biach. Biach. So to say something like, is the animal bad, would be something like don and biach, don and biach. The word for young is og. Og. And to ask, is the woman young, would be something like norganche. Norganche. The word for old is shan. And to ask something like, is the man old, or is the person old, would be shen and dun, and shen and dun. To ask, is it, is simply just ne, which would come from an, and then the old form of saying e. So ne. Other forms like this can be found, for example, she, or chane, etc. So when the masculine pronoun, the a, is next to is, an, chan, nach, it becomes e in East Perthshire Gaelic. To say isn't it, so the isn't it form of is would be nach. Nach. And then using the form we've just learnt in the previous part, it would be nache, nache, for isn't it. So isn't it? Nache. Isn't she a young child? Nach lenui. Nach lenui. Isn't he a dog? Nach kua. Nach kua. So the thing to remember is, if the a is directly after the nach or the an or the is, etc., then it becomes an e sound, because they've kept their old sound that is used in most of like standard and other dialects. If it is separated, it becomes a. In standard dialect, often when they are talking about something in the sense of, like the English, what a mess, what a big thing, etc., they would say aber something. So kind of like say, and then the thing that they're trying to emphasize. Now, I haven't found this pattern in Perthshire Gaelic. That's not to say that it didn't exist, or, that's not to say it did exist. I simply have no idea. So what I do, instead of saying abad, I would use the forms that we've been learning today in this lesson, in its place. So, for example, isbeg and luchag, for example. So, what a small mouse, kind of in that sense, if that makes sense, only because I haven't found that pattern in Perthshire Gaelic. Now, that's not to say that people can't, or they can't use that form. You do what you do, what you want to do with your Gaelic. I use this form mostly just because I haven't found it, and I'm trying to model my own Gaelic as close to the native speakers of Perthshire as possible. But each to their own. So let's round up all of the words, or all of the new words that we've looked at. Is. Chan or hun. Chan, hun. N. Nach, nach. Shan, shan. Og, og. Bria, bria. Biach, biach. Ech, or, and jech. Ech, and jech. Krien, krien. Lach, lach. Arch, arch. Don, don.